When someone pushes your buttons, your first instinct might be to react quickly, emotionally, maybe even defensively. That moment right after a comment, a look or an action that rubs you the wrong way is crucial. It's the space between stimulus and response where your power lies. If you can learn to pause before you react, you've already won half the battle. This pause doesn't need to be long. It can be just a couple of seconds. Enough time to take a breath, roll your shoulders back, maybe even ask yourself, what's really happening here? That question alone can shift your perspective. Instead of charging forward emotionally, you begin to observe what's going on with a little more clarity and a little less heat. We often think that reacting quickly shows strength, that being assertive or clapping back means we're in control. But the truth is, reacting on impulse means someone else is pulling the strings. You're letting their tone, their attitude, or their energy determine yours. That's not control. That's emotional outsourcing. When you pause, you're making a choice. You're saying, I see what's happening, and I'm not giving it my immediate emotional attention. That simple act gives you authority over your mind and body in ways most people never even consider. You no longer feel dragged into every argument or provoked by every small irritation. Instead, you observe, you choose, and you act with intention, or sometimes you don't act at all. And that's just as powerful. It's not always easy. Your body might still flood with emotion. Your chest might tighten, your jaw might clench, and your inner voice might scream, "Say something!" That's fine. That's normal. Let that wave rise. Just don't ride it. Use the breath. It's the quickest, most accessible tool you have. Inhale slowly. Feel it. Let it anchor you. Then exhale any tension out of your body. The breath becomes your buffer. The moment you focus on it, you're no longer on autopilot. You're now choosing to be grounded. In that stillness, you can remind yourself that not everything deserves a reaction. Not every opinion needs to be corrected. Not every tone deserves to be matched. And definitely not every challenge is yours to take on. The ability to not engage, not because you're afraid or unsure, but because you're solid in yourself, is one of the clearest signs of maturity. When you pause, you also create room for curiosity. Instead of taking someone's words at face value, you might think, what's going on with them today? You begin to see that maybe their anger, sarcasm, or attitude has nothing to do with you at all. And most of the time, it doesn't. People speak from where they are, not necessarily from where you are. They bring their stress, insecurities, fears, and assumptions into conversations without even realizing it. If you absorb all of that, you carry their weight on top of your own. So the pause is more than just a silence. It's a filter. It helps you separate what's yours from what isn't. It gives you the freedom to respond, not react. To think, not just feel. To observe, not absorb. Over time, this practice rewires how you engage with the world. You stop walking around ready to defend yourself against every perceived slight. You stop needing to be right all the time. You stop feeling like you're in constant survival mode. Instead, you begin to lead with clarity and calm. You become someone who people trust, not because you're the loudest or most reactive, but because you don't flinch under pressure. That doesn't mean you never speak up. It doesn't mean you suppress your feelings or become passive. Quite the opposite. It means when you do speak, it's with purpose. It means your words land heavier because they're not scattered in emotional noise. They're focused, clean, and impactful. There's nothing weak about holding your tongue until your head catches up with your heart. In fact, that's strength. Emotional strength. And it's a skill, not something you're born with, but something you build through awareness and repetition. You don't need to be perfect at it. You'll slip. You'll react. You'll catch yourself mid-sentence and think, I should have paused. That's okay. That's the learning curve. The fact that you notice it is progress. The fact that you want to be intentional is everything. The real goal isn't to be unbothered. That's a myth. The real goal is to become so anchored in yourself that even when you are bothered, you don't hand your peace over to someone else. You feel it, you pause, and you choose your next move, fully awake, fully aware, and fully in control. That's how you stop being angry. Not by ignoring it, but by outgrowing the need to let it lead you. All it takes is a pause. It's easy to take things personally. Someone rolls their eyes, gives you a short response, ignores a message, or makes a sarcastic comment, and suddenly your mind starts racing. What did I do? Are they mad at me? Do they even respect me? That spiral happens fast, and it can hijack your entire mood. But here's a truth that will change the way you move through life. What other people do is almost never about you. Their behavior is about them. Their mood, their stress, their insecurities, their upbringing, their current mental state, all of that plays into how they show up. But instead of recognizing that, we often internalize it. We take their actions as a reflection of our worth, our value, or our place in the world. That's where the suffering begins. Detaching from someone's behavior doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to not carry what isn't yours. It means learning to observe people without letting their emotional weather become your climate. They can have a storm inside them, but you don't have to stand in the rain. Let's say someone speaks to you with a sharp tone. Your instinct might be to fire back or shut down. But what if you took a second and reminded yourself, this isn't mine? Maybe they had a rough morning. Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe they're simply someone who hasn't learned how to communicate with respect. Whatever the reason, their tone does not determine your value or your peace unless you hand it over. One of the most freeing decisions you can make is to stop needing other people's approval to feel stable. When you anchor your self-worth to someone else's behavior, how kind they are, how consistent they are, how they treat you, you become emotionally dependent on forces outside your control. And the more dependent you are, the more reactive you become. A short text ruins your day. A delayed response makes you question everything. A small slight starts to feel like a personal attack. But when you detach, you give yourself permission to observe without absorbing. You notice the behavior, but you don't let it take root inside you. You see what's happening, but you don't personalize it. That's the shift from reaction to awareness. This doesn't mean you tolerate mistreatment or allow people to disrespect you. Boundaries still matter. Standards still matter, but the emotional charge behind it, the anger, the confusion, the constant questioning, that starts to dissolve. You stop chasing explanations. You stop needing closure from people who can't even offer clarity to themselves. The beauty of detachment is that it returns your focus to where it belongs you. How you want to respond, what you will and won't accept, who you choose to be in this moment, regardless of who's in front of you, It's helpful to think of it like a mirror. You're a mirror, clear, steady, reflective. If someone walks up to that mirror angry or insecure, it doesn't change the mirror. It just reflects what's already there. Their anger isn't your anger. Their insecurity isn't your problem to solve. You're just witnessing it. You don't have to hold it. Detaching also means releasing the need to fix people. So many of us try to manage someone else's behavior to feel safe. We over-explain, walk on eggshells, or tiptoe around moods just to avoid conflict. But that's not peace. That's control disguised as kindness. You can't be the emotional regulator for everyone in your life. It's not your job to keep people calm so you can feel okay. That's backwards. Let people be whatever they need to be, and you stay steady. Sometimes detachment looks like silence. Not every comment needs a comeback. Not every energy needs to be matched. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is let someone's behavior be their own echo and not engage. That's not weakness. That's restraint, and it's powerful. Other times, detachment looks like walking away. Not dramatically, not in anger, just with a quiet clarity that says, "This no longer aligns with me." You don't need to convince someone of your worth. If they can't see it, that's their limitation, not yours. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop making everything about you. It's not disconnection, it's wisdom. You start to understand that people are living in their own mental worlds, reacting from their own pain, stuck in patterns that began long before you arrived. And when you see that clearly, you stop taking it personally. You're not here to decode everyone's behavior. You're here to stay grounded in who you are, regardless of who they choose to be. That's emotional maturity. That's inner freedom. And that's how you stop letting people bother you. When you detach, you stop dancing to the rhythm of other people's chaos. You stay rooted. You stay calm. You remember their behavior is not your identity. Their mood is not your mirror. And your peace is not up for grabs. Every day, you're faced with moments that test your patience. A rude driver cuts you off. Someone interrupts you mid-sentence. A coworker sends a passive-aggressive email, or a friend drops a comment that doesn't sit right. These situations aren't always big, but they build. And before you know it, your energy is scattered. Your focus is gone. Your peace is leaking out in 10 different directions. That's why one of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is this worth my energy? It sounds simple, but it's a mindset shift. Because what you're really asking is this situation, this person, or this moment valuable enough to deserve my full attention, my emotional reaction, or my mental space? Most of the time, the answer is no. Not because you don't care, but because not everything is meant to be held on to. Energy is currency. You only have so much to spend in a day. Where you invest, it determines the quality of your thoughts, your relationships, and your well-being. Would you hand over your wallet to someone just because they annoyed you? Of course not. But when you give away your emotional energy to every minor irritation, that's exactly what you're doing. Spending something valuable on something that gives you no return. It's not about being passive. It's about being selective. You don't need to engage in every debate. You don't have to argue your point every time you're misunderstood. You don't have to match someone's anger with more anger. That kind of constant emotional spending leaves you exhausted and often no closer to resolution. When you ask, Is this worth my energy? You're creating space. Space to pause. Space to weigh what actually matters. Space to walk away from things that don't need to be fought. This is the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is instant, driven by emotion. Responding is intentional, grounded in perspective. Some people thrive on pulling you into drama. They say things just to provoke. They move through life with chaos as their default setting. And if you're not careful, you'll get pulled into their storm. But when you stop and ask yourself that one question, you interrupt the cycle. You remind yourself that your energy is yours to manage. You don't owe anyone your peace just because they showed up with problems. Sometimes it helps to look ahead. Imagine yourself later that night, thinking back on the situation. Will you be glad you said something? Will it matter in a day, a week, a year? So often, the things that feel urgent in the moment fade into the background with just a little time and distance. That comment, that look, that misunderstanding, it stops feeling so personal once you step back. Perspective always softens the edges. And in that space, you gain clarity. You realize that holding on to something, frustration, resentment, the need to be right, often costs more than it gives. You start choosing your battles differently. Not everything becomes a hill to die on. Some things are just bumps in the road. You acknowledge them, you adjust, and you keep moving. Asking, is this worth my energy? Also reminds you that you get to set the tone for your life. That's not something other people decide for you. You can be in the middle of a tense conversation and still choose calm. You can be misunderstood and still choose grace. You can disagree with someone and still choose not to engage in conflict. That's not weakness. That's power. The quiet kind that doesn't need to prove anything. You don't need to win every exchange. You don't need to correct every wrong. Sometimes letting it go is the smartest, strongest move you can make. You walk away with your energy intact, your dignity in place, and your peace preserved. This doesn't mean you become indifferent or emotionally shut off. It means you become intentional. You decide what's worth your emotional investment and what isn't. You protect your energy the same way you'd protect anything valuable, with awareness, boundaries, and care. And the more you practice this, the more peaceful your life becomes. You stop living in reaction mode. You stop letting every comment, post, or tone dictate your emotional state. You become less affected, not because you've hardened, but because you've sharpened your sense of what deserves you. What deserves your presence, your energy, your words, and what simply doesn't. When you treat your energy as sacred, you stop giving it away cheaply. You realize that peace isn't just something that happens, it's something you choose. In every moment, with every response, with every decision to hold or release, you choose. And with one small question, you take your power back. Is this worth my energy? Ask it often, live by it, and watch how much lighter life begins to feel. Silence is one of the most powerful responses you have, but it's also one of the most underused. We live in a world that tells you to say something back, prove your point, defend yourself, explain your side, argue until you're heard. It makes you feel like being silent means you're weak, passive, or that you're letting someone get away with something. But that's not what silence really is. Silence is not about losing power. It's about holding it. When you choose not to respond, not to react, not to feed the moment with more words or energy, you're standing in control of yourself. You're saying, I don't need to play this game. I don't need to match this energy. I don't need to lower myself to be understood. Sometimes people speak just to provoke. They want to pull you in, get a reaction, prove something to themselves. And when you engage, you give them exactly what they were looking for, a reaction that keeps the cycle going. But when you stay quiet, when you don't bite, when you don't match their tone, you break that cycle. You become the interruption they didn't expect. Silence doesn't mean you don't feel. It doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean you're letting anything slide. It means you are filtering. You are taking your time. You are letting the noise pass without inviting it into your mind. You are observing rather than absorbing. And that's what most people don't understand. That silence is intentional. It's not about not knowing what to say. It's about knowing that not everything deserves to be said. Some situations don't need a comeback. Some comments don't deserve acknowledgement. Some arguments don't have to be won. Your piece is not worth proving a point. You might be surprised how much people reveal when you say nothing. When you don't rush to fill the silence, others start to show their patterns, their intentions, their emotional state. People tend to get uncomfortable in silence because they expect a reaction. They expect to be challenged or fed. When you don't give that to them, the spotlight turns inward. They're left sitting with their own words, their own energy, their own reflection. That discomfort, that's growth, not for them, but for you. Because choosing silence requires self-control. It requires restraint. And restraint is not weakness. It's maturity. It means you've stopped reacting to life and started choosing how to respond to it. There's a difference between reacting quickly and responding wisely. Reacting is emotional. It's fast, it's heated, and it usually escalates things. Responding, on the other hand, comes from a centered place. And sometimes the wisest response is none at all. That doesn't mean you're avoiding. That doesn't mean you're bottling things up. It means you're not reacting just to satisfy a moment of ego. You're not speaking just to protect your pride. You're letting things breathe. You're allowing space for clarity to emerge. Silence also creates room for reflection, both for you and for the other person. In that pause, you give yourself time to ask, what do I actually want to say? What's the outcome I want? Is this worth engaging at all? And if it is, your eventual response will come from intention, not impulse. In relationships, in work, in conflict, silence often communicates more than words ever could. It can say, I'm not playing that game. It can say, I see what you're doing, and I won't match it. It can say, this isn't a conversation I'm interested in continuing. And sometimes it simply says, I choose peace over power struggles. One of the most freeing things you can realize is that not every moment needs your voice. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every disrespect needs to be met with a counterpunch. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room is your calm, your quiet, your refusal to respond just because you were provoked. You don't always need to explain yourself. You don't always need to clear your name. You don't always need to engage to prove you're right. The people who truly understand, you don't need convincing. And the ones who don't understand, you probably aren't listening anyway. Silence is not submission. It's a strategy. It's a choice to protect your energy. It's emotional discipline. And the more you practice it, the more you'll realize how often you use to give your voice away too easily, to arguments that didn't matter, to people who didn't listen, to situations that only drained you. You'll learn that silence can be strength. It can be clarity. It can be power. Because you're not just reacting anymore, you're leading yourself. You're choosing who gets your words, your energy, your attention, and who doesn't. You don't need to respond to prove you're confident. You don't need to speak just because someone's expecting it. Confidence sometimes sounds like silence, like presence, like self-control. And once you learn that, you stop being pulled into emotional chaos. You stop feeling the need to defend every move. You stay rooted, grounded in your own calm, and let the noise pass. Because not everything deserves your voice. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. You don't have to explain yourself to protect your peace. That's the part most people struggle with. We've been taught that boundaries need to be justified, that if we say no, we have to give a reason. If we take space, we need to make sure others are okay with it. If we distance ourselves, we owe people an explanation. But the truth is, you don't. Your boundaries are not up for debate, and you don't need to be loud about them for them to be real. The strongest boundaries are often the quietest ones. They're not dramatic, they're not posted publicly, and they don't come with a warning label. They show up in your choices, your silence, your absence, your energy. You don't yell, "I'm setting a boundary!" You just stop engaging in ways that drain you. You stop chasing conversations that go nowhere. You stop proving yourself to people who've already made up their mind. You stop explaining your worth to people who aren't listening. To quiet boundaries are calm. They don't need to make a scene. They just shift how you move. And that's the beauty of them. They're rooted in self-respect, not in proving a point. They come from the understanding that you don't need anyone's permission to take care of yourself. You don't need someone to agree with your boundary for it to be valid. You don't need them to understand it, like it, or even respect it. Their approval isn't what gives it power. Your consistency does. And that's what owning your boundaries quietly really means. You stop waiting for other people to make it easy for you to stand up for yourself. You stand up anyway. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it disappoints them, even if they try to guilt you into shrinking. Sometimes people will call you distant, cold, or selfish when you start protecting your peace. That's because they benefited from your lack of boundaries. They were used to access to your time, your energy, your emotional availability. When that access gets limited, it shakes their sense of control. But that's not your responsibility to fix. Your responsibility is to show up for yourself with clarity and care, even if others don't like the new version of you. You can love people and still set boundaries with them. In fact, real love makes room for boundaries. Because love without limits turns into resentment. You can be kind and firm at the same time. You can say no with a soft voice. You can choose yourself without making someone else the villain. And when you own your boundaries quietly, it's not about creating distance from people. It's about creating closeness with yourself. It's about finally listening to that inner voice that says, "I'm tired. This doesn't feel good. I need space." So often, we ignore that voice because we don't want to disappoint anyone. But while we're busy pleasing others, we're disappointing ourselves. Over and over. Every time you abandon your own needs to make someone else comfortable, You chip away at your self-trust. You teach yourself that other people's approval matters more than your well-being. And eventually, you start to feel it in your body, in your mood, in your peace. That's when it's time to reset. Not with a big announcement. Just with a quiet decision, I'm no longer betraying myself to keep the peace. When you own your boundaries, you stop over-explaining. You stop asking, is this okay with you? And start asking, is this right for me? You stop softening your truth to make it easier for others to swallow. You say what needs to be said calmly and let the rest unfold. It's not always easy. You'll question yourself. You'll wonder if you're being too much. You'll feel the pull to go back to your old patterns. But growth always feels uncomfortable at first. The goal is not to become rigid. It's to become real. Real with yourself about what you need. Real with others about what you will and won't accept. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You won't need to brace yourself for difficult conversations. You won't feel anxious every time you say no. You'll start to feel grounded, clear, free, because you'll realize that protecting your peace is not selfish. It's essential. You're not here to be constantly available, endlessly understanding, or always accommodating. You're here to live in alignment with your values. And that means drawing lines, not to shut people out, but to keep yourself in. And if someone walks away because you set a boundary, let them. You didn't lose anything. You learned who couldn't meet you with the same level of care you give yourself. That's not a loss. That's clarity. So no, you don't have to explain your boundaries to everyone. You just have to live them. Let your silence speak for you. Let your consistency do the talking. Let your presence or your absence send the message. Because when you truly own your boundaries, you don't need to defend them. You just embody them quietly, fully, unapologetically.